Today's day 1 of 14 days thinking about Jane Seymour. Apologies, it's very hot, my dog won't stop barking, and there's famously not very much information on Jane, but we're going to do this anyway. Jane Seymour's mother was Margery Wentworth, also sometimes known as Margaret Wentworth, also known as Lady Seymour or Dame Seymour. Now Jane's mother, so I'm going to go with Margery, came from a much more prestigious line than the man she eventually married, Jane's father, who was John Seymour. So she could actually claim kinship, which claimed to be related to most of all of the big, powerful families in England. Now her father, through a very long, slightly tenuous line, was related to royalty, which could be traced back to Edward III via Edward III's great granddaughter. So that meant when it came to Jane, she did have just the tiniest little drop of royal blood in her via her mother and via her grandfather, her maternal grandfather. And hopefully I've got this right. I could do with drawing a chart. So Margaret's mother, who was Anne Say. So Anne Say is the grandmother of Jane Seymour. Say's sister, Elizabeth Say, was the grandmother of Anne Boleyn. So you can see the real relationship through cousins there. Means, if I'm correct in thinking, Jane Seymour's mum and Anne Boleyn's mum were first cousins. So very close connection there. While they did have that connection and they were both considered gentry, Anne Boleyn was still of a slightly higher status than Jane Seymour. Margaret Wentworth, or Margery Wentworth, secured herself before she was married as a place in the household of her aunt, who was the Countess of Surrey. And it's believed that Jane's mother, Margaret, was a great beauty. While she was at this court, the poet John Skelton took a bit of a shine to her. Nothing toward happened, but he wrote a poem about sort of 10 of the ladies that were there. Most of it was very formal, but the part that he wrote about Jane's mother was very flattering indeed. What I find quite interesting, and obviously it doesn't always follow, but there's all these mentions of how beautiful Margery Wentworth was, but when it comes to Jane, everyone seems to consider her quite plain looking. It seems strange that you would have such a great beauty as a mother that doesn't get passed on, but point to think about later. In 1494, she married John Seymour. We'll talk about him tomorrow. In terms of whether it was a happy marriage, they had 10 children together. That's taken to be a sign that it was a happy marriage. Make of that what you will. So they had a lot of children. They actually had 7 boys and 3 girls. So in this way, she was sort of the perfect wife. The first 4 children were boys, and then finally, maybe as a bit of a light relief, they had a girl, which was Jane. Jane was born 5th. Another point that's often taken as evidence that it was a happy marriage, that she actually outlived her husband by 15 years and never remarried. Maybe that was mourning, or maybe she just had enough of marriage by then. I think I'm getting a bit sceptical in my old age. What do you think? The other thing to mention is that he did have an illegitimate, we'll talk about him tomorrow, like I said, but he did have an illegitimate child with somebody else in 1530. Now, her last child was born in 1520. He had a child with someone else in 1530, so that does make me wonder if she just sort of said enough is enough with the childbearing at this point. So maybe that did cause him to wander about a little bit. Obviously, we know that was sort of expected and put up with at the time. Illegitimate child bit makes me question how happy this marriage was. So obviously we will talk about this, but they lived at Wolf Hall. You've probably seen that on the TV series. She would have been in charge of running the household, ensuring these 10 children, although a couple of them did die quite young, did receive a decent education. And we'll think about Jane's education on day 3. Not that we know a huge amount about it, but she would have been very busy keeping these 10 children under control. So she did actually live until 1550, which means 2 things. Firstly, she would have lived to have seen Jane reach the throne, which was in 1536. She will have lived to see the birth of Edward in 1537, and she will have also lived to see her grandson on the throne. Edward came to the throne in 1547, so she will have been the grandmother of the king for around 3 years by the time she died. Do you think, considering how much we know about someone like Margaret Beaufort, who was obviously grandmother of the king, it's a shame we don't know any more about her than this, but presumably nobody expected Jane to grow up and be queen. And as we'll talk about going forward, there seemed to be a bit of a worry she wouldn't even marry at all, never mind to be the king. But so she seems like a very busy woman. She seems like a real model for what a good wife was supposed to be at the time, producing a lot of boys and then taking pretty good care of everybody. So that's Margery. That's Margery or Margaret, whichever you want to go for. Wentworth, Jane's mother. So I'll see you tomorrow when we're going to think about Jane's father, John Seymour. See you then.